What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of National Pastime. John and Toaster here, and we are past the deadline for NFL teams having to cut their rosters down to 53. Doesn't mean there isn't more movement happening. There's probably some movement happening as we speak here, but the biggest news, Cam Newton gets cut by the New England Patriots. That was like the first thing that came down in the morning, at least the first thing I saw when I woke up. How shocked are you by that? Like, how shocked should we be by that?
Originally it was little bit shocking, Cotton, but when you look at it holistically, it makes a lot of sense. I'm sure that there's a conversation between Bill Belichick and Cam Newton, and gave him the opportunity to be the backup quarterback, and that was something that Cam ultimately decided either wasn't worth it for him on that team or
Yeah.
wasn't worth it outside of exploring other opportunities. And this is just, it really is another example of Bill Belichick doing right by players for as much crap as he gets for being a businessman, getting rid of people in their prime 1 year too early rather than 1 year too late. I'm almost positive that that's the conversation that went down. But once you look at the game tape and look at Cam's tape from last year, there really wasn't a consideration not to just go all in with Mac right now, because
Mm-hmm.
Cam wasn't a differentiator. He was the safe play because he knew your system, and
Mm-hmm.
he was, I'll call him effective last year. He won 7 games, and that was throwing 8 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. He was one of the poorest ranked passers in the league last year. I think he was only ahead of Jimmy G, Tua, and Jalen Hurts as far as passer rating per PFF's grading last year. And Jimmy had 6 games, Tua had 9, and Hurts had 4. So, I mean, basically the bottom of the barrel, but still was able to get them basically within a game of
Mm-hmm.
500, right? Like, he was 1 yard away against the Seahawks. He was a
Yeah.
fumble away from taking the Bills to overtime. So that's why originally we thought that, okay, let's go with the safe thing. He was there. He kept you competitive all of last year. But Mac not making mistakes and making quick, decisive decisions, the writing was on the wall.
Yeah. I think you're probably right, because at the end of the day, Belichick's going to do well, at least most of the time, is going to do what's best for his team. Cam still holds value on that roster. And as a backup, I mean, the things that you can scheme, you wouldn't go full 2 quarterback system, but the things that you could scheme with him at the goal line, he was still very effective. Like, part of the reason he was so valuable last year, you mentioned his passing numbers, was how effective he was running the ball, especially near the goal line. I mean, he's still a freak. He's still
Yep.
big. He's still strong. So there was value there. So I tend to agree with you. I think he probably is letting Cam explore. That said, I don't know how many options there are for Cam. There's really not. The only spot I can really think of where he could jump in and really compete to be a starter would probably be Houston, but that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. And, Houston,
Houston wants to lose at this point, and that's
yeah.
another shitty situation for Tyrod Taylor. There's no reason that he's going to come in and compete for a starting job on somebody that's going to be probably the bottom of their conference. And I say probably only because they're competing with Jacksonville, which makes it tough
Hmm.
if they do get a legitimate quarterback in there. But he, Tyrod Taylor is going to be effective enough for them. And Cam can't join the team for another 5 days because he's not vaccinated. So you're going to start somebody that shows up on a Tuesday to start
Yeah.
an NFL game in a brand new system. Granted, it's, Casario.
Casario,
I always
Nick
add one
Casario.
too many R's in there. Casario. And just leverage that Belichick connection. Like, that's not gonna fly. So there, I don't see him going to Texas. I don't see him going to Carolina was the other option that hit me. And then I thought, okay, maybe
No.
a backup for Tua and a backup for Zach Wilson has no veteran presence right now. So those two
Yeah.
looked like legitimate options, especially because they like to have some insight into the other competition that they're going to play 2 games a year. But he doesn't want to be a
Sure.
backup. I don't think he wants to be a
Right.
backup.
No, I don't think so either. And he's really going to have to, if he is going to play this year, he's going to have to choose between the backup options that might present the best opportunity. You'd mentioned those two. I don't think those teams would bite just because we've talked about how, fragile, um, or I guess how carefully the Jets have handled Zach Wilson's situation. I don't think you want to bring someone in like Cam, a former MVP candidate, somebody who's gunning for the starting job, to have Zach looking over his shoulder. I mean, if they're going to get a veteran backup, it's probably more like a Nick Foles-esque kind of guy. Same thing with the Dolphins. Tua had that shit all last year with Ryan Fitzpatrick going back and forth, and that clearly fucked with him. Who knows where he
What do you mean it
stands.
fucked with him? It got him 2 extra wins. No, I can
Yeah,
I can agree with you on Tua. The Zach Wilson, that's his team. They're all in on Zach. So I don't see that happening. The only place he really fit was places where he would be a known backup and would take second fiddle to either Dak Prescott or a Lamar Jackson, because those are two offenses where obviously Baltimore probably fits him a little bit better, but those are two offenses where the scheme wouldn't just drastically change, especially with the talent around Dak in Dallas, that he could come in, and as long as he was willing to say, this is your team, then he could jive. But it makes more sense to him to just sit out, wait for a starter to go down, because when you sign on to a team, you are that team's backup, right? If he
right.
signs on to Dallas Cowboys and Lamar Jackson goes down, he's not going to be able to jump in and fill in for Lamar Jackson. So I don't see him
Right.
signing with another team anytime soon.
Yeah, I agree. The only other option I was thinking about was maybe Indianapolis, and that's only because of how fragile Carson Wentz is. And there could be an opportunity, probably a greater opportunity there, that Wentz gets hurt or something goes down and he could step in. But otherwise I agree with you. He's probably looking at, not signing right now. And there's a potential that he doesn't play this year, right?
I mean, there
If
was a
none of those
potential
other
he didn't play
opportunities.
last year. The Patriots didn't pick him up until what, June,
Yeah,
July of last year. Nobody else wanted him at that point
right.
either, because just schematically, he's not the same passing threat that he used to be, which is so ironic to say, because even on his last interception, like, that was a good deep throw. It's that he can't hit his intermediate and short checkdowns, which is just, it's kind of dumbfounding, because you'd think that it would be going the opposite way, right? The knocks usually the arm strength. Okay, you can hit the easy check
Yeah.
downs, you can be accurate, but you can't hit those big play opportunities. And Cam's the exact opposite, that he can hit the deep downfield pass, but then when he has to throw it 5 yards in the flats, he either chucks it in the ground or chucks it into the out of bounds.
Yeah, so to your point here, just pulling up Cam's stats from last year. So deep throws, so throws 20 plus yards past the line of scrimmage. He had a PFF grade of 77.5, which is fairly solid, honestly. Um, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. He only completed 48%, but again, those are lower percentage throws. Medium, he was actually a lot better than I thought. 10 to 19 yards. He had an 82.9 grade. He did throw 3 interceptions, no touchdowns. But to your point, throwing short, so 0 to 9 yards.
In
He
a
had a
majority
58
of the
point,
Patriots plays.
right. 58.5 passing grade, 4 interceptions to just 4 touchdowns. So yeah, and behind the line of scrimmage, he was also middling, 70.4 grade. So yeah, it's his deep throwing wasn't the issue. It was executing the layups.
Right.
And the problem with being an effective deep thrower is that in and of itself is very sporadic. Like, you can be a good deep thrower and still not be all that consistent while doing so. So yeah, I'm with you there. Yeah, at the end of the day, I'm pulling for Cam. I hope he can find a spot, but yeah, if he's really trying to be the starter, I don't see many options for him. One thing I want to touch on here that you mentioned briefly, but so Cam's unvaccinated. We know that because he had to sit out 5 days a week and a half ago, which kind of opened the door for Mac Jones a little bit more here. There's no way this wasn't part of the consideration with the cut, right? Now, I know Bill Belichick said no, it wasn't, but it had to have factored in to some degree. You mention all the time that the two biggest things with Bill Belichick and the Patriots from a quarterback standpoint are availability and limiting turnovers, not being vaccinated severely puts you at risk from an availability standpoint this year.
Well, that's the problem with the backup position and why I don't feel like he's going to have people clamoring to fill that backup role is if you have a backup quarterback, the number one thing you're counting on from your backup quarterback is that they're ready to step in at any moment. And you don't end up with a Kirk Cousins, Kellen Mond situation
Yeah.
in Minnesota, where now your entire quarterback room is gone because an unvaccinated player either caught COVID or was a close contact with somebody that
Right.
had COVID. So that it's going to be an extremely limiting factor, and you aren't allowed to cut people for not being vaccinated, but you can certainly assess that when you're going to hire people, which is the big thing for all of those fringe players that just got cut down in, obviously the gigantic roster reduction from 80 to 53.
Yeah, I mean, you can't say that you've cut somebody because
Well,
of
you
their
can
vaccination.
say that you've cut somebody because they're vaccinated, but it's a really bad decision and results in an NFLPA investigation.